Andrew Cuomo is known for political tactics that are at best questionable, at worst Trump-like. He can be a bully and there's no real way around it, except because he's a bully on the Democratic side, he gets embraced by some Democratic Party establishment types like Hillary Clinton and now like Tom Perez. Yeah, Tom Perez and the DNC have once again interfered in an ongoing Democratic primary and have chosen to endorse Andrew Cuomo over Cynthia Nixon, which Bernie Sanders criticized publicly at a Washington Post event a few days ago. And they have endorsed him despite some Democrats complaining about his bullying tactics in the past to outlets like the New York Times. Some Democrats contend that Cuomo's brusqueness goes beyond what is strictly necessary for the purposes of governing. They say Mr. Cuomo can be bluntly scornful of his critics and their staffs, branding proposals from other Democrats as incompetent or rejecting criticism with a belittling "spare me." One particularly familiar and vexing tactic to some Democrats is Mr. Cuomo's habit of delivering acid attacks on them in the press in the form of anonymous quotations served up by his staff or the governor himself. In the same piece, Reverend Al Sharpton was quoted as saying that Cuomo had been prone to outbursts and tantrums in the past. Sound familiar? Sounds a little like Trump to me. But that would all be okay, really, if it were just in the context of politics. Look, I don't agree with many of Andrew Cuomo's policies and his politics, and I really think he's enormously corrupt. But sometimes politics is dirty. I get it, and he's certainly a dirty politician, but I would be willing to let it slide. However, when you begin bullying constituents, and not just other politicians, that's when it gets dicey. This is from reporter Zach Fink of NY1. Akeem Browder says he got a call last night from Governor Cuomo's counsel, Alfonso David, telling him to consider his approach when criticizing Cuomo for not following through on promised criminal justice reforms. Browder says David told him he sounds angry at the governor. David also confirmed the call happened, but characterized it differently. Wait. So this is a private citizen, Akeem Browder, getting a call from Andrew Cuomo's counsel asking him to tone down his criticism of the governor. Akeem Browder is just a New Yorker. He's an activist, and I know he's run on the Green Party ticket, but he's not a state senator, he's not in office, he's not in the professional scope of Cuomo's work. He doesn't have that kind of power. He's just a regular guy. A regular guy who was criticizing Cuomo for this reason. On June 6, 2015, Khalif Browder's brother, Akeem, was at his home in the Bronx, New York, when he received a frantic call from his mother. Khalif had just died by suicide. He was 22. Khalif Browder died 2 years after he was released from Rikers Island, where he'd spent 3 years without being convicted of a crime. In 2010, at the age of 16, he was arrested for second-degree robbery and spent 3 years jailed, awaiting trial for allegedly stealing a backpack. 2 of those years were spent in solitary confinement. He maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration. He was unable to make the $3,000 bail and unwilling to take a plea deal. When his family managed to raise the money, his bail was denied. Akeem Browder is honoring his brother's memory by asking politicians to commit to ensuring no one else falls victim to a broken criminal justice system. Browder has created a pledge asking lawmakers and advocates to push for the elimination of wealth-based detention practices, which can force defendants to remain behind bars for weeks, months, or, as in Khalif's case, years, simply because they can't afford to bail out. The pledge also asks lawmakers and advocates to make a commitment to reduce jail populations with real speedy trial discovery and bail reform. The charge was initially led by Browder's mother, Vanita, who challenged lawmakers to act. Vanita died in 2016 at the age of 63 after suffering from complications of a heart attack. Akeem Browder has since stepped up and acted as a voice for the family. He says they're frustrated by broken promises made by politicians, including New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. According to Browder, Cuomo promised he'd support criminal justice reform to prevent what happened to Khalif from happening to someone else. I really felt his words, Browder said. Then April 1st came, and he didn't get it into the budget. It wasn't because he had opposition. He had power to get it done, and that's what he'd promised us. So let me get this straight. This man, private citizen Akeem Browder, has experienced the loss of his mother, who was also an activist, and he is honoring her memory. And both Akeem and his mother, Vanita, were thrown into activism and were compelled to be activists because Akeem's brother and Vanita's son, Khalif, killed himself after being thrown into solitary confinement for 2 years for a crime he was never convicted for. By the way, solitary confinement is a complete disgrace and should be outlawed in the United States completely, pretty much. But he was in solitary confinement for allegedly stealing a backpack. A backpack. He was never even convicted, and he was psychologically tortured for a supposed theft of a frickin' backpack. You think if that happened to you, and that your brother and your mother, and they passed away, wouldn't you be angry? And if you, according to Akeem, received a promise from the governor that he would address it, and then he didn't, wouldn't you be even angrier? But no. Andrew Cuomo is entitled to be shielded from all criticism because he is entitled to everything. That's what he thinks, really. That's how he acts. That's what makes him a bully. His father was governor, so now he is entitled to be governor, and he is entitled to win the governor's race without a real challenger like Cynthia Nixon. Which brings me to his challenger, Cynthia Nixon. Cynthia Nixon has been discussing criminal justice reform, the very issue that Akeem is speaking out about very openly. She has criticized Cuomo a lot for doing nothing about marijuana, and she's adamant about legalizing marijuana. And she's framing it as an issue of criminal justice and race, because it is. She's doing the right thing there. Cuomo is really without a paddle on that issue. He can't keep up with her there. Early last year, Mr. Cuomo, who had supported medical marijuana use, said he remained opposed to pot as a means of a good time, calling it a gateway drug. In January, he proposed that a commission be established to look at legalizing it. In April, immediately after Ms. Nixon made a case for legalization as a means of reducing racial inequity in the criminal justice system, Mr. Cuomo came forward, saying that the situation with marijuana had changed dramatically because so many states near New York had legalized it or were about to, and that essentially it was here anyway. Wow, what bold progressive leadership. I read that to show that Cuomo is self-conscious about this issue. He knows that he is behind Cynthia Nixon and to the right of her on marijuana, among the other criminal justice reforms that she has been championing in her campaign. And citizens like Akeem Browder are highlighting that he is behind her on that. So then Cuomo gets his cronies to try to get Akeem to shut up about it, but it has backfired. There's only so much intimidation and obfuscation that Andrew Cuomo can do. He's not a progressive, not even close, and he is not an ethical person or politician. He is a bully who is bathed in corruption, and his staff won't be able to put out all of those fires and suppress all of that information. The word is out. Andrew Cuomo is not progressive, and you can't put that genie back in that bottle.